working towards building what some have described as a self-sustaining economy. But the truth is, there is no economy that doesn't bring in things from time to time, either finished products, raw materials. But the question is, we need to, of course, manage that to a large extent. But where we're at right now is that we need a lot of importing at different levels. And with that comes the question of the duties. You've seen what the naira to the dollar has been over the past couple of months. So imagine you're a business person. Just imagine the headache you'll have to go through on a daily basis, just trying to clear those goods, compute the amount, and the rest. There's been some proposal from different think tanks and economists as to how to approach this, just to ensure that at least the prices of goods in the market are not too high for us to climb. So this morning, we're getting into that important conversation and exploring those proposals such that we empower the government with some of those ideas. And we're joined on the program this morning by Mr. Muda Yusuf. He's the CEO of a CPPE, that's a Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. He's right here with us in our Lagos studio. Good morning, Dr. Yusuf. Welcome to the
morning. Good morning, Kayode.
And joining us, absolutely, joining us virtually is Mr. Emenike Nwokioji, who's National President, Association of Nigerian Licensed Customs Agents. Good morning, Mr. Nwokioji. It's good to have you on the morning brief as well.
Kayode, good morning, and good morning to Dr. Muda Yusuf.
Right. I know this is a thorny issue, really, so let's just get deep into it. And I'll begin with Dr. Yusuf, because you have put out a proposal of late asking the customs to employ a certain framework for the computation, particularly when it comes to Forex. But I want us to give a proper background to this so we know why this is important. Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. We know private enterprises are responsible for majority of employment in Nigeria. So their health is, it directly correlates with the health of the economy. I need to be sure the economic term I'm using because I'm amidst economists. So why is this conversation important in the first place?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kayode. The conversation is important because we are trying to build an economy that is sustainable, and an economy that has the capacity to create jobs, an economy that supports investment. Because in any economy, it is investment that sustains the economy. And the bulk of these investments comes from the private sector. The government has a responsibility to create an enabling environment for this investment. Because it is through investment that you can create employment, that you can generate revenue, that you can even produce for exports, that you can diversify the economy. There's a whole lot that is tied to investment. And trade is very critical to investment. And when we talk about trade, it's not just about going to China to bring some finished goods and things like that. It goes beyond that. If you're a manufacturer, you need equipment, you need raw materials. If you're an ICT person, you need to import some equipment, some laptops, or whatever it is. Whatever sector you are, there is a trade component in whatever you do. So that is why it is important to get it right. Apart from dealing with the macroeconomic issues, which is around the reforms around the foreign exchange, oil subsidy, we agree with that. The trade component of economic management is also very, very important. So what we are dealing with now is high level of instability, uncertainty, unpredictability in the area of trade as a result of this volatility in the customs duty exchange rate. And by the way, this duty exchange rate is not coming from the customs. It's coming from the CBN, because we are talking about the exchange rate that is used for the purposes of computing import duty. And it is the CBN that determines it. So what we like to see is some stability. I mean, in the first quarter of this year, we had changes in this exchange rate 28 times in the first quarter. If you add what the changes that took place in April, you should be getting close to maybe 38 or 40. So as a business person, how do you plan? How do you price your products? How do you even give cost to your clients if you are executing a project or you are a contractor? How do you do that? So that stability component is extremely important, and that is why we are concerned about this volatility in the exchange rate. Then there's also the cost component.
Right.
We are at a time when we are dealing with high level of inflation. And whatever we can do to bring the cost of living down,
We must do it.
we must do it. Whatever we can do to reduce the cost of production, we have to do it.
Let me pause you for a moment and bring in Mr. Wokioji, because you've talked about that instability, and this is someone who also operates in that sector. So, Mr. Wokioji, let's get even deeper, because you have the industry of sorts in the palm of your hands. Just how unstable has it been? Just to take what Dr. Yusuf has said even further, give us a vivid picture.
Yeah, good morning, all. Dr. Yusuf had said it all, laying the background. But let's just assume that you are a vendor in an oil company or in any company where you are asked to supply a particular spare part. The first move is for you to source that, whatever that component is. And after that, you raise a proper input. Based on that, you will use the prevailing exchange rate to work out the import duty and other charges before you submit the quote. But how do you handle it? By the time that shipment is still on the way, the exchange rate has changed over 3 times. And by the time upon arrival, are you going back to the company to ask them for variation? Of course, you can't get that. That is one. And if you are a trader, before you import, you need to know the import duty and other charges to help you build their cost and know how much you can put it out there for the market. But before the arrival, exchange rate has changed. What do? Even the money, you must have calculated that import duty will be about 5 million. Upon arrival, you are looking for 7 million. Where will you source that money to raise to enable you get the cargo out of the port? It cannot just help in any way in planning, and all it succeeds in doing is pulling the economy back. So we continue to advocate that what we require from the CBN is for them maybe to have a fixed exchange rate for import purposes, even if it's quarterly. If not, so that it can help you within 3 months, you know what the exchange rate is like. So I think that's the only way to get it solved now. This frequent, sometimes it changes twice in a day. It cannot just help anybody.
Dr. Yusuf, I'm wondering whether this approach by the federal government, because they are all the federal government at the end of the day, whether it's the CBN, okay, let's say the federal government and the CBN. So let's face the CBN now, because we're talking about FX accretion at some point. We had difficulty in having as much dollar in our vault as possible. And all of this is now impacted even further the market space. So I wanted to find out from you and maybe him, what exactly is the intent of government? Because they must have a thinking, from your understanding, for this level of changes that they implement. I'm just wondering, because I suppose they know that this level of volatility will impact on the prices of goods and services, yet they go on with it. Do you have an understanding of what their mindset is? Probably we can explain from there to be able to dissuade or proffer a solution.
No, there's a fundamental framework for determining the exchange rates, following the unification of rates between the parallel market and the official window, which is a major reform of this administration. Now, when you have that kind of shift in the model of exchange rate management, which is more like a market-driven exchange rate, that in itself is prone to a lot of volatility because it's determined by market forces. And because there are two things here now. There is the foreign exchange ecosystem or whatever. There is the trade component. Now, in the foreign exchange space, a lot of volatility is happening, although we have seen some improvement. in terms of the appreciation of the currency. You know, there was a time the rate was as high as 1,006, 1,008. People are predicting that to even get to 2,000. But happily, because of all the measures that have been taken by the CBN, the rate has come down, which is good. But it is not enough for the rate to come down. It is very important to have some stability. So to answer your question directly, this volatility is coming from the strategy of floating the currency and allow market forces to determine the rate. So we are dealing with two volatilities now. There is the volatility within the foreign exchange ecosystem itself as a result of this floating of the rate. Now, this volatility is now being transmitted to trade because it is now affecting the stability of the import duty. So we are dealing with two volatility issues now. So because in the Customs Act, the exchange rate for the computation of import duty is the one that is determined by the central bank.
I think my question technically is this floating and all of these things that are going on.
Yes.
It appears we're not really ready for free market.
Well, my understanding at the beginning was that what we were going to have was what we call a managed float.
Okay.
Because really, there's hardly any economy where you float currency completely. No. You have to manage the float.
What's that?
And what I mean by that is that you determine the level of the threshold that you think is sustainable within the context of your economic fundamentals, and make sure that you just play around, plus or minus, just as the way we do with NPR, where you play around a corridor. You can say plus or minus 100 naira, 200 naira, so that you play around that, depending on your economic fundamentals. And I think it can be done. We are not saying that you go and fix the exchange rate at 1,000 to the dollar or 500. No. You have to situate it within the context of your economic fundamentals, within the context of your capacity to support the currency. So that framework to ensure that stability is what we have not seen yet. And that is what is creating this problem. But even if you are dealing with that problem in the foreign exchange end, it is easier to manage at the trade policy end because you have much control of that. And that does not disrupt the reform in any way. If the government or CBN decides in conjunction with the monetary authority to say, okay, in order to stem this instability as far as trade is concerned, in order to even bring down the cost of living and moderate inflation, let us fix the exchange rate for the computation of import duty as say 1,000. And you do that quarterly. The next quarter you can look at it, and because this thing requires a handshake between the monetary and the fiscal policy. That is the only way this thing can work. It's not something that the CBN alone can do because of the trade policy implication of what is happening now.
I'm wondering if you also see some policy inconsistency there, with, apart from the floating of the naira, the CBN's intervention with the sale of Forex at a certain price to the BDCs. That's a departure from how it started with the floating of the naira and the impact of that. But let's, achieve a balance and allow Mr. Nwokioji to respond to that. In addition to you were beginning to talk about, give us a vivid picture of the impact of this volatility on business, from your space there, especially when you talk about, the foreign exchange rate being maybe 1,000 at the time that an importation had started, and then, before the goods arrive is 1,300 naira to the dollar. How is it impacting on business there? Has it led to a reduction in importation by importers in that space? Perhaps you could also give us a measure.
It's affecting the level of importation here. Not every trader can take that gamble, because whatever you do now is a gamble. You can't really determine what is going to happen between the time of import For instance, we have a job on our table now. As of last week, just say about 8 days ago, the import duty was about 51 million. But the importer cannot raise that money. And as at yesterday, when we were in the office after the public holiday, because of the exchange rate, the import duty has up to 43 million. So you can imagine the gap between 51 and 43. So it can't just help anybody in planning. And for us to quote, because for certain companies, you do door to door. You have agreed how much you are going to use to ship it, to clear it and deliver to them. You can't quote and come out of it without burning your finger. So a whole lot needs to be done, considering that this country is import-dependent economy that we're running presently. I don't think anything short of having a fixed rate. It might not be proper in economics, but for the situation we have found ourselves, I think that's the solution that we can offer as men, as those in the field.
All right, so I want to drill deeper and maybe widen the conversation at this rate, because we know what we're experiencing now with petrol scarcity. I know you're wondering how is this related, but we have it on good authority that yes, government has said we're not paying subsidy, but we understand that what is happening is that the forex being used to calculate the cost of the petrol being brought in is what is being pegged at a certain amount. It's not the same forex. It's not at the same rate that a normal or a usual business person would get it either from the BDC or what have you. So to that extent, we've seen that the government is able to peg the foreign exchange at a certain amount, particularly for petrol. So I'll come to Dr. Yusuf now. I don't know if that is what you're also hearing, because people are saying the price of crude is going up, but our own still remains the same. So obviously some subsidy is being paid, but we understand that it is with the forex. So Dr. Yusuf, is that what you're suggesting to be done for customs as well? Let there be a certain pegging at a window so that we don't see all of that volatility.
Yeah, before I answer that, just something to support what Mr. Anwoke said. Now, there's a major risk of trade diversion when we make it very difficult for people to trade legitimately. You know, when the cost of trade through an official channel is too prohibitive, people will begin to circumvent the rules. Now, with what is happening now, it's like creating a smuggler's paradise. Because, I mean, imagine what it costs to clear a vehicle now. I don't know whether you are thinking of buying a new vehicle now.
I ride a scooter, thankfully, no. Dr. Yusuf, so I'm good.
It's prohibitive because of this import duty thing. Particularly the exchange rate component of the import duty computation. And when you continue to have that, you create a big incentive for smuggling in the economy, which is not good.
And we understand that even officials of customs are sometimes involved in facilitating these
Exactly.
models.
Some of these things happen. Because when you create the incentive for people to come through the bush, come through all of that is one. Secondly, we lose a lot of our maritime business to neighboring countries. Benin Republic, Lomé, and the rest of them, Togo. You know, a lot of our businesses go there just because of all these bottlenecks. I know the implication for job creation in the maritime sector. Our maritime sector should be the hub for the sub-region. But when the cost is too much, you lose a lot of business. So from that point of view, I think we need to properly look at these things and also be consultative in our approach. Because what happens with one policy affects other sectors. And that is why in economics we talk about a general equilibrium approach to economic management. And what that means is that you don't look at just a single variable in policy. You look at the implication of changes in that variable for other sectors of the economy. And that is where the value of coordination, the value of consultation, the value of stakeholder engagement. That is where it comes from. Because if you have that kind of approach to policy management, it enriches the quality of policy because everybody is on board. I understand the implication of one policy for other sectors of the economy. No, that is. I think I need to make that point. It is very important for our economic policy management process, and that is why I see a lot of good in what the president did by setting up an economic management team or economic coordination team, which consists not only of just the policymakers, but even the private sector. Manufacturers Association is there. Some big investors are there. If you put this kind of issue on that kind of table, the CBN will have the opportunity to have a feedback on the implications of this for other sectors of the economy. That is very, very important in economic policy management. Now, coming back to your question as to the issue of fuel, it's a different matter. Because there's a whole lot of political economy issues around the price of PMS. If you had left the price of PMS purely to market forces, we will not be buying fuel at 600 or 620. We're buying fuel at close to 1,000 naira per liter. But because of the social implication of leaving it to market forces, that is why the government has stepped in order to moderate it and to reduce the hardship on the people. That is why we are seeing this kind of stability around the prices. And that is why it is only the NNPC for now.
That is important.
That is important. Because it's not viable for any private sector person to import. Of course, that has compromised the whole principle of withdrawal of subsidy. But again, you have to think through the implications of some of this policy. If you have to go the whole hog, as the IMF you want us to go to, we have created another crisis. So from time to time, you look at the policy environment, you look at how you can tinker with it within the context of your own peculiarities, within the context of your own social context, political context. Those things matter in economic policy. So what the CBN is doing, what the NNPC is doing, because the NNPC is more or less essentially a government parastatal or baby. And
even though it's
yes, but the shareholding is still 100% government for now. And because of the social dimension of some of these things, it has to be stabilized. And the NNPC is also in charge of our crude oil sales and all of that. So they can do some kind of cross-subsidization, to be able to just stabilize. That is why it is only the NNPC that is in that space. What we're experiencing now, I think it is more of some disruption in the supply chain, which they have not fully disclosed, what actually has resulted in that, because no other person is important. It's only the NNPC.
When we talk about these NNPC issues, like the more you listen and learn, the more you get confused when you juxtapose it with the PIA and how things play out. But that's a conversation for another day. We'll explore that because we're expecting them to float to get to the stock exchange this year. We're not seeing much because of what is in written. I'm looking at what is in the law as to why the PIA was established. Let me come to you, sir, on this particular issue, because it looks like we may need to deploy some level of a specialized capitalism in our own system, as Dr. Yusuf has explained. But for you, as somebody in that particular space, what are the immediate hanging fruits that the government can deploy to help bring some level of stability besides what has been proposed in terms of pricing and all of that? And maybe you can give us an example of how much it takes now to just clear, say, a moderate car, maybe a Toyota, one of those cars, so that people will understand, because sometimes we talk like this and it may be a bit vague. Maybe positive directly for us to understand exactly what you're dealing with.
Okay, let me start with the car issue. A lot of factors determine the import duty of a vehicle. The make, the trim, which is the model, the year of manufacture. All these factors count. We need to know the type, the engine capacity, and all that will help you. Just like I've said earlier, as a man there in the studio, maybe you go online and see a vehicle, and then you pick the price there, and then you send it to us to work out the import duty, which we will do and hand over to you based on prevailing exchange rate. But before the arrival of the vessel and the car, the exchange rate changes. And we'll come back to you and tell you that you need to add an additional 1 million or 500,000. The next thing is that you would say clearing agents they are criminals. I think what we continue to advocate for government is some of these policies, let them get some custom agents. For instance, if you are bringing a car, we'll go back to the same car. Apart from dealing with import duty, which concerns customs, we'll deal with the police, with the shipping line, with the NDLA now, because if you are importing back of certain amount, they will need to know how you sort their money to get that because of money laundering. So we relate with all these agencies of government. But it's unfortunate that when these policies are being formulated, they find it difficult to get us involved. For advice, let them work with us. We have a whole lot of things we can offer to government that will help them so that we will stop this policy somersault. Today you will hear this, the next day. Not too long ago, the National Single Window Committee was formed. But nobody from the maritime sector, as it concerns custom licensed agents and freight forwarder, was there. How do you involve people? We are the people that are in the field that should be able to give information that is real time to all these organizations and all these committees to enable them come up with policies that will help the economy. Having said that, it's difficult to organize or to inform or to advise government because since we are not quite close, we might not feel enough of what they are feeling or what they are going through. If we have a window through which we can see what they are seeing, then it will be easy for us to advise them.
Wow, I'm doing a mental calculation in my head as you gave us a breakdown of what it would be, to clear a vehicle. And I imagine also that the cost of phones today is as high. Certain phones is as high as buying a piece of land. So those are the realities. Let's bring it to the studio, Dr. Yusuf. You're proposing a stable exchange rate quarterly. Is that feasible under the circumstances, considering that, in the next 2 weeks, in fact, last 2 weeks, we were celebrating the Naira gaining 1,000 Naira to the dollar, considering that it could also change sometimes, significantly with the free fall of the Naira. So is it realistic? And in the same breath, as it is now, you describe it as prohibitive, and we can get a vivid picture from Mr. Nwokyoji. Is government being Shylock?
Well, in terms of whether fixing the rate is realistic, I believe it is realistic. Because we should not mix the two. There is a main reform of government around the foreign exchange market. The rates are determined by market forces. But some of us have advocated that we should have a framework, even within the context of market forces, to keep it within a particular band, depending on the capacity to support that band. Plus or minus 50 Naira, plus or minus 100 Naira. That is good for stability. So in that context, I will not advocate any fixing, because that is a major reform issue, and it could cause a disruption to the reform. We don't want to see that. But with respect to trade, because this is purely a trade issue, we can fix it for two reasons. One, in order to bring down the cost of doing business, and in order to bring down the cost of living generally. Because you cannot have a situation where the exchange rate is depreciating, which is a big additional cost, then import duty is also rising at the same time. That's a double jeopardy. If the rate is depreciating and the cost of import has already gone up as a result of that, why must we now go and increase the import duty again? That is suffocating the system. If one is pushing up price, I think the least we can do is to use the other, I'm talking of the trade policy area now, to moderate the prices. So that is why I'm suggesting that first, a quarterly fixing of the rates and starting with 1,000 naira to the dollar, just for the purpose of import duty computation. Ideally, because if you look at the tariff book, because of this stability issue, the tariff book is a 5-year book. So that you have import duty stable for 5 years. And there's a reason for that.
Regardless of what the foreign exchange rate is.
Yes. For 5 years. There's a reason for that. It used to be 7 years. But when we had this common external tariff, which is for the whole West African sub-region, it was brought down to 5 years. So that over a 5-year horizon, you have a stable import duty. But the variable that is now disrupting the things now is this custom duty exchange rate. That is what is the issue. If this variable had been within the control of the fiscal authorities, we will not be sitting here to be complaining, because the fiscal authorities will be able to manage the whole ecosystem around issues of international trade and ensure stability. But this is an external variable coming from the central bank. So that is why it is very important for the central bank to also see the implication of this variable. So between the fiscal authority and the monetary authority, they can agree to a rate that can be reviewed on a quarterly basis.
When you talked about implications, Dr. Yusuf, as a wind down, so what will the implication of this be? Because I imagine people are thinking, so does that mean government revenue generated from imports will drop? Obviously, it's not like government will be paying any differentials. It's just bringing it down to allow business to be able to import and predict their businesses. But the question with revenue, you know, they will always say customs, they have a target. They're trying to meet a target. I know people have talked about whether it should be a revenue generating agency or a business empowering agency. But speak to us about the implications for government, because we need to look at the pros and cons, weigh them and say, okay, well, the pros are more than the cons, or otherwise, then we should either go ahead with this or not. And finally, what are the authorities saying about this? Because I imagine that they will have been given some feedback. Is this feasible?
Well, the implication for government, I think, is even negative in my view.
Negative in terms of, is it like a
Even
bad implication or a good implication?
Bad
If
because
they set the
no, yes, if you continue with this kind of approach, you know, this volatile approach, first, it's negative for investment. And if I mean, the whole essence of government in the economic policy is to stimulate investment. If you have a policy that is creating so much of uncertainty, it negates the whole essence of what the government wants to achieve by stimulating investment. It has negative impact on job creation. I just talked to you about the problem of smuggling that is likely to increase. I was speaking to some maritime sector stakeholders. They said that they'd rather go and use their money to buy treasury bills and invest in government bonds, rather than go and do any investment where they do not know what will happen the following day.
That's dangerous.
We don't want to run an economy where everybody is going to buy treasury bills and government bonds. Will that create employment? No. We want the real economy to thrive.
Right.
Because that is the way to ensure a sustainable economy.
So the pros outweigh the cons for you if they were to set it at
if they set it at a particular rate,
okay,
for purposes of international trade. I'm not talking about forex markets.
There you go.
For purposes of international trade, it will help everybody.
Mr. Wokeoji, final words, the pros and cons.
Yeah, you mentioned about setting target for the customs. That is very strange. As a matter of fact, it's a Nigerian thing. Nigerian customs or customs worldwide are not meant for revenue generation. No. you can find out anywhere. They are for border control and anti-smuggling. It's not revenue generating organ. Giving certain targets for customs on revenue generation, is it based on what? Based on expected high influx of goods or what? With the volatility in the market, foreign exchange market, is it based on what?
Right.
I need somebody to tell me how government come about that. Right now, the ports are almost empty because we don't have enough imports to keep the ports running. And yet somebody is expecting the custom to generate more revenue. So I don't know where that particular economy came from. So I can only say that I think we are getting it somehow wrong from the top there. No, custom should not be seen as a revenue generating organ of government. If they are allowed to operate the way they are designed to operate in other countries, all they will do is to help to stimulate the economy, and it will be better for everybody.
And I think with those words, we'll anchor at this point for now. And well, we'll say that the next move, of course, is government's move, see how they respond to this. But we'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Emenike Nwokoji, National President, Association of Nigerian Licensed Customs Agents. Thank you for your time, as well as Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, CPPE. That's the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. Thank you so much for your time as well.
Thank you, Karen.